Hello and welcome back to day 2 of our Dominaria United limited set review. Today we are grading blue cards for Dominaria United Limited, both sealed and draft. And if you haven't already viewed the white Dominaria United Limited set review, I recommend you start there as I go over a little bit more of the context of how I grade cards. And also I'm making a playlist of all the different colors for reviewing the entire set. So I recommend viewing that playlist. I think I'll be able to link that right up above here if you haven't seen that already. But now we're going to go into blue. And again, I am putting out 2 to 3 videos a day, every day this week, in order to make sure we get out this information as quickly as possible and prepare you, because the end of this week, we have Dominaria United opening up to MTG Arena, and it's also going to be coming out, I think the weekend, I think this weekend's actually pre-release. I gotta look into that because I might go to pre-release myself for Real Paper Magic. But let's jump into it. So first up, we have Pixie Illusionist. This is a 1 blue mana for a 1/1 fairy wizard creature with kicker, 3 and a green. It has flying. If Pixie Illusionist was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. You can tap it, and target land you control becomes the basic land type of your choice until end of turn. Alright, so a 1/1 flyer for 1 is a fine rate. You don't really want to spend a card on such a low impact creatures, so that's why you don't play too many 1 mana cost creatures. But the fact that this smooths out your mana is a nice trade-off, and the duality of it being a kind of a D+ creature later in the game, but still an impactful 3/3 flyer is nice. So this is something that can have an effect early and late. So with that, I would call this better than filler. It's a playable. I would give this a C-. Up next, we have Shore Up. 1 blue mana for an instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains hexproof until end of turn. Untap it. Alright. I tend to like your tricks to have a bit more of an impact than what this is for 1 mana. This is versatile. It can save your creature. It is a trick for +1/+1. You get to untap it. It does a lot of things for 1 mana, but it's not overall super impactful. I would give this a D+. I do think this is in the range of filler, but the versatility makes it on the higher end range of filler. Up next, we have Timely Interference. A 1 mana instant with kicker, 1 and a red. Target creature gets -1/-0 until end of turn. If the spell was kicked, that creature blocks this turn if able. Draw a card. Alright, I like my 1 mana draw a card spells. A 1 mana conditional save your creature draw a card is a fine base rate, and turning it into setup, into removal that you need to set up in order to still draw a card for 3 is fine. Versatility makes this worth its cost. Draw a card is pretty important in the spells deck because it draws you into more potential spells that you can cast to pay to kind of feed your payoff engines. So with this, I give this a solid playable. I think this is a C. Up next, we have Essence Scatter, a reprint that comes up fairly often. This is 1 and a blue for a instant counter target creature spell. While I don't love my counter spells in Limited, I do like countering creature spells, and especially for 2 mana. I like this card quite a bit. It's effectively a removal. Yes, it's counter, but at the same time, for 2 mana, that's pretty good. I would give this card a C+. Alright, moving on. We have Haunting Figment, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 illusion creature. It has Vigilance. Haunting Figment can't be blocked as long as you've cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn. Alright, a 2 mana, 2 power creature with Vigilance is an okay rate. 1 toughness doesn't hurt. 1 toughness does hurt in a format filled with 1/1s though, so it gets a bit of a knock for that. But you can't go too low for a 2 mana, 2/1 Vigilance creature with upside. I'm going to give this a C-. Up next, we have Impede Momentum. 1 a blue for a sorcery. Tap target creature and put 3 stun counters on it. Also, scry 1. So Stun counters, again, is kind of your Frost Links effect of tapping a creature. It doesn't untap during its next untap step, but instead you remove a stun counter from it. This card is a spell that really slows down their creature. It's removal for quite a long period of time, but ultimately you are still down a card, and I don't like that. It does have Scry 1, which is kind of half of draw a card, but sorcery speed, and you're ultimately down a card. I don't love this. I think this is filler. It will tap down and deal with creatures for a long time, so I think this is on the higher end filler, but I would give this a D+. Up next, Impulse, 1 and a blue for an instant. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So generally, I don't like to spend 2 mana not impacting the board, but this is at least a spell that can draw more spells, or an engine that cares about spells. So you are feeding into the spell theme, and I like that. I still will not give this more than filler, but I think this is a D+. Up next, we have Negate, another reprint. 1 and a blue for an instant, counter target non-creature spell. So while I said I like 2 mana counter spells in Limited, and I don't like counter spells in general, though, I like the 2 mana counter spell that can counter creatures, because creatures are very important in Limited. I don't like it when it can't. Now, there is a big spell theme in this, so in some ways you could see this as a sideboard card, but I'm going to give it a rating of a D. I don't like that it can't counter creatures. Alright, up next, Volsh Tideturner, 1 and a blue for a 1/3 Merfolk Wizard creature. Tap, add a blue. Spend this mana only to cast an instant or sorcery spell, or a kick spell. Alright, so we've seen quite a few spells already, and by the way, when I speak in the context, mostly in blue and some other things here, when I say spell, yes, spells are, creatures as you cast them count as spells, other cards count as spells. I'm using the word spells to summarize instant or sorcery without having to say that too often, okay? So you kind of read into the context of when I say spells. But we've seen a spells theme, and this helps you cast spells. A 1/3 is fine on defense. It does ramp you up for spells, and it ramps you up for kicker, which is a bit better than we've seen this kind of effect in the past. But it still is just a 1/3 for 2, and I still think this is filler. I'm going to give this a D+. Up next, we have Academy Wall. 2 and a blue for a 0/5 wall creature with Defender. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. This ability triggers once each turn. I have a hard time giving a 3 mana pure defense creature higher than filler rating, and I won't give it higher than that today. The opponent can still fly over you, go wide. There's lots of ways to beat around this wall. Admittedly, the ability does allow you to cycle through your cards to get more spells, so it helps feed the spell theme. But I don't think that's enough to really get this past filler. I'll give this a D+. And then we have Phyrexian Espionage, 2 and a blue for a sorcery with kicker 1 and a black. Draw 2 cards. If the spell was kicked, each opponent discards a card. So I'm known to like a draw spell or 2 in my deck. Ideally, you get your draws off of permanents, so you impact the board when you draw spells. But this will do in a pinch. I would give this a D+. I am definitely going to play this a few times throughout the length of the set. I would like better cards, but 2 and a blue to draw 2 cards is okay. And the fact that you can pay its kicker to get your opponent to discard a card, it's reasonable. D+. Up next, Soaring Drake, 2 and a blue for a 2/3 flyer. Fairly straightforward and vanilla, but it's a good rate for 3 mana. Normally, I wouldn't expect to get a 2/3 flyer for 3. I'd expect like a 2/2. But it's still nothing special. It's just a decent rate creature. I'll give this a C. Next, we have Tolarian Geyser, 2 and a blue for a sorcery, kicker white, return target creature to its owner's hand, draw a card. If the spell was kicked, you gain 3 life. So, bouncing plus drawing a card for 3 with a potential life gain when you pay an extra 1 more, I'm in for that. I'm not usually the biggest fan of bounce, but you can be up on mana, you can be up on cards, you can be up on life, all within this 1 card. So I'll take this. I think this is better than just a normal playable. It doesn't draw me into blue, but I'll give this a C+. Oh, one other thing I mentioned on that last card I forgot to mention as I'm looking at my notes. Remember, there's a lot of tokens in this set, so it can kind of count as removal, not just bounce for those tokens as well. So that's definitely part of what brings it up to a C+. Next, we have Vota Sea Scavenger, 2 and a blue for a 3/2 Merfolk Rogue with Domain. When Vota Sea Scavenger enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. You may put one of those cards on top of your library, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. That's an okay rate. 3 mana for a 3/2, it's not great. But it does have the deck stacking upside to it, so this is, I think, a solid playable. I just give this a C. All right, up next, Talus Lookout. 2 blue for a 3/2 flyer. I actually saw somebody who rated this earlier in the set, and they kind of glossed over it as just something small. But the ability here, when Talus Lookout dies, look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So to me, this is definitely a draw into blue. I debated whether to give this a B or a B minus. I'm just going to give this a B because I feel like this does solidly bring me into blue. So 4 mana for a 3/2 flyer is already a great rate. The fact that this can then draw a card, and not just draw a card, but draw one of 2 cards that you prefer from the top of your library, I think makes this a very good common. It does hurt it that it doesn't happen when it enters the battlefield. You have to wait for this to die before you get that triggered ability, and that is a big downside, don't get me wrong. That might pull this down to a B minus, but I'm going to give this a solid B because a 3/2 flyer for 4 that can draw you a card and your choice of a card, it's just too good to really pass up. So solid B it is for me here, and I think this will be one of your mythic commons. Up next, while I had a lot to say about Talus Lookout, I don't have a lot to say about Tidepool Turtle. 3 and a blue for a 2/5, pay 2 and a blue scry run. It has a lot of toughness. That's all I got. I'm going to give this one a D. I guess on that last one, to be fair, it's nice always to have a mana sink, some place to put your mana late in the game, and being able to scry is a nice ability, but still, I'm giving it a D. Up next, Tolarian Terror, 6 and a blue for a 5/5 serpent creature. This spell costs 1 last to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard, ward 2. Alright, so in evaluating cards, you want to think through how often you're going to get that card above rate. So 7 mana for a 5/5, clearly that's not good. But it costs 1 less to cast for each instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. Now, there are a lot of instants and sorceries, but if you think about it, you do need 2 instants and sorceries in your graveyard before this is even at rate, and you need 3 before it becomes good. And I think that is a lot to ask. I think it will happen. It's not horrible. And it is nice that it has ward 2 on a big creature, so it's harder to remove. I gave this a D+. Admittedly, now that I give this a second look, I might be on the side of giving this a C-. The reason I'm going to stick with a D+, though, here, is I still like my bigger creatures to do more than this. This isn't really ending the game. It's just a big body. So it really depends on how the set plays out, but I'm going to stick with D+ for now. Up next, we have Combat Research, so we're moving into our uncommons. Combat Research has 1 blue for Enchantment Aura, Enchant Creature. Enchanted Creature has whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. As long as Enchanted Creature is legendary, it gets +1/+1 and has Ward 1. Now, if you watched our multicolor review, you will see that every multicolored creature in this set has legendary. So legendary will be very common. So you can put this on your creature and have it have +1/+1 Ward 1, which is a nice bonus for 1. But the big thing is whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Now, in Limited, I am wary to rate enchantment auras very highly, because if you enchant your own creature and then they remove that creature, your opponent does, you just got 2 for 1. Now, the nice thing here is you can put this on your creature pre-combat main phase, attack with some invasive creature, and get your draw card, and now you don't really care as much about being 2 for 1 because you already got your draw your card trigger off of it. Another thing, though, to keep in mind is that you do not have to enchant your own creature with this. Now, you probably don't want to enchant your opponent's creature if it's legendary, but you can enchant one of their creatures, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, to you, in this case, draw a card. So you can put this on your opponent's creature. It does mean that you won't really want to remove that creature. You're kind of 2 for 1 yourself. With all this, and the fact that if you did enchant your own creature or even an opponent's creature, it takes a few turns for you to draw enough cards. Remember, you are playing this as a card and using a card. All right, I had to cut off there for a second because I saw that my mic was going crazy with static noise, and I went a few cards past this, but I'll just restate what I said about this. So, Combat Research, remember, you are using a card in order to even get this ability in the first place, so you're already kind of down a card, and then it takes a few turns before you actually end up getting your cards back from this hitting another opponent. So with all that, I'm just going to give this a C, but I did think it was an interesting card to talk about because usually this ability does not let you play the enchantment on your opponent's creature because it says whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, and the opponent of the enchantment, even though it grants the ability to the creature, the opponent of the enchantment is still your opponent. This one, though, does not say opponent. It says whenever it deals combat damage to a player. So you can play this on your opponent's card. All right. Up next, we have Rona's Vortex. It's 1 blue for an instant with kicker 2 and a black. Return target creature or planeswalker you don't control to its owner's hand. If this spell was kicked, put that permanent on the bottom of its owner's library instead. Alright, so a 1-mana bounce spell that can be removal for 4 is good. There's a lot of duality that happens in this set, where you can pick one option or the other, one early, one late type of thing, which makes it for a lot of good gameplay, because you have so many different options. So, note that when this removes a creature or planeswalker, it does not even put it into the graveyard. So graveyard recursion doesn't get it back. It puts it on the bottom of the player's library. So having the duality of an unsummon and a 4-mana removal spell, I think makes this a good card. It's not quite enough to draw me into blue, but I'll give this a C+. Alright, Battlewing Mystic. For 1 and a blue, you get a 2/1 bird wizard creature with kicker red. It has flying. When Battlewing Mystic enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, discard your hand, then draw 2 cards. Alright, so the base case test here is a 2/1 flyer for 2. That's already a good rate. I like that card. It lets you play this card early, but it becomes pretty broken when you can play this late in the game. Apparently I'm having microphone issues. It happened again. I'll just keep going and keep an eye out for it. But the base case of this card is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 flyer, which is great early in the game. But when you can pay its kicker late in the game, it becomes broken. The idea is you play out all your cards from your hand, you play this with kicker, and then you get to draw 2 cards. That's just a great card. I give this card a solid B, because it's good early, it's great late. That makes for a good card. All right, up next, we have Coral Colony. 1 and a blue for a 1/4 defender. It's a wall. It has 1 and a blue tap. Target player mills X cards, where X is the number of creatures you control with defender. Apparently, there's a mill theme in the set. I haven't seen a whole lot of support for it yet, and I'm always skeptical of mill because it's a hard way to kill your opponent unless it has good support in common, and I haven't seen that yet. There is some mill cards coming up you'll see as we go on in blue at uncommon, but I'm still skeptical of the strategy. Also, like I said in my review of white, I'm not a big fan of defender creatures. So ultimately, I can't give this card too high of a grade. I will say a 1/4 for 2 is a pretty decent defender. So it can't be too low because of that, but I still think this is filler. I'm going to give this a D+. Up next, we have Founding the Third Path. 1 and a blue for a saga with read ahead. You may cast instant or sorcery spell with mana value 1 or 2 from your hand without paying its mana cost. Chapter 2 is target player mills 4 cards. Chapter 3 is exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Copy it, you may cast the copy. Alright, so this is an interesting card, especially around how conditional it is. Conditionally, you get out this for free because you can put out a 1 or 2 mana card with it. Then Chapter 2, I don't think matters as much. Yes, it matches the mill theme, but I don't think people will be doing that too much. We'll see. Maybe there's more support for it in black or something. But Chapter 3 is really where this card gets interesting and what you would be playing it for. And you might just skip ahead to 3 quite often. For 2 mana, you can effectively exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, copy it, and cast it. So doing this straight on the same turn of playing this, exiling it, and then playing your instant or sorcery spell. The problem with that is it makes it expensive, because you already spent 2 mana casting this card, and you still have to pay the mana cost of the instant or sorcery spell you're casting. So while you can get a copy of your best instant or sorcery card in your graveyard, it makes it kind of expensive. But you can do this with read ahead, such that you play either Chapter 1 or Chapter 2 first, and then say you did it Chapter 2, next turn you'll be able to copy an instant or sorcery spell and not pay the 2 mana because you already paid the 2 in a previous turn. So you have to set this up right, and it has a lot of conditional things that make it decent, but I don't see this being more than a C- right now. We'll see how this plays out in practicality, but I'm giving it a C-. Joint Exploration. 1 and a blue for an instant with kicker green. Scry 2, then draw a card. If this spell was kicked, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. We're getting okay here when your 2 mana draw spells can also ramp you up. So you get the Scry 2 draw card effect when you need that, if you have nothing to play on turn 2, or you're later in the game searching for a particular card. But the fact that conditionally can also ramp you up is good. Now, it's not as good as a lot of the 3 mana ramp spells we've seen in the past, because they let you dig through your library for a new card, put that onto the battlefield tapped. In this case, you have to have it in your hand, that land. So with all this, I already told you how I felt about the 2 mana draw card spells. They're not bad, but I'm not going to give it a great rating either. I do think this one is more on the playable side, and it's better than filler, but I'm just going to give it a C-. Up next, we have Protect the Negotiators. For 1 and a blue, we have an instant with kicker white. If the spell was kicked, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. Counter target spell, unless its controller pays 1 for each creature you control. Alright, so we've got another okay counter spell that will scale with the game, which is what you really want with these counter spells, that cause your opponent to pay mana especially. And it's not quite as good as Make Disappear from Streets of New Capenna, because that was a good 2-drop. In this case, you're probably not going to have another creature out to make this a 2-drop. But I still think it's a solid playable. I would give this a C. Up next, we have Urtai's Scorn. 1 blue for an instant. This spell costs blue less to cast if an opponent casts 2 or more spells this turn. Counter target spell. Another playable counter spell. But 3 mana is quite a bit for a counter spell. And holding up 2 mana under the bet that your opponent will double spell is a bit of a ask to make you do. It's nice when you have an extra 2 mana laying around, though, that you can counter something. So I think this is another decent playable. I don't think it's quite as good as Protect the Negotiators, but I'll give this a C-. Up next, we have Micromancer. For 3 to blue, you get a 3/3 human wizard creature. When Micromancer enters the battlefield, you may search your library for instant or sorcery card with mana value 1, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Alright, I like a 4 mana 3/3 draw card effect. Now, the problem is, it's only drawing you a 1 mana card, which isn't a lot of power. Luckily, it's not always drawing you, like usually after you get to 4 mana, you don't want to draw lands as much, so you get to skip right to making sure you draw a spell. So it kind of has that advantage to it. But it's still only getting you the 1 mana spell. I like this card. I think it's a solid playable. I give this a C. Up next, we have Frostfist Strider. For 3 blue, you get a 4/4 elemental giant creature with Ward 2. When Frostfist Strider enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Alright, so we have a bigger Frost Lynx with some upside of a Ward 2. I liked Frost Lynx. I think this is even better in that it taps down potentially an even stronger creature later in the game, and lets you go in for a bigger attacks. So I like this card quite a bit. It's not enough to pull me into blue. I'll give this a solid C+. And then we have Djinn of the Fountain. For 4 blue, we get a 4/4 flyer. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you can choose one. Dejin of the Fountain gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Exile Djinn of the Fountain, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, or scry 1. Alright, so a 4/4 flyer for 6 is a decent rate to begin with. And then it is really hard to deal with. You'll be able to +1/+1 it. You'll be able to blink it out of existence whenever it gets tried to get removed. When you don't need any of that and you play an instant or sorcery, you can at least scry for better cards. So this really does set you up. This is a good finisher. This is a good 6-end creature. I think that this is not quite a pull into blue, but it's a good card. I also give this a C+. Sometimes you debate a little bit, like, between your C pluses, which one is better. So, Djinn of the Fountain versus the Frostfist Strider we saw before. I think they're good in different decks. Depends how aggressive you want to be versus how more controlling you want to be. This is more the control, whereas the Frostfist Strider is more the aggression side, to tap their creature down and attack in. It's tough to say which one's actually better. I think Djinn of the Fountain is slightly better just because it's a 4/4 flyer, so it has a bigger impact, and the abilities are quite good. Now, who knows, though, the fact that Frostfist Strider, that's a tongue twister to me, apparently. The fact that that's only 5 mana does make that quite a bit better there. So it's tough to say. I think they're about equal. But yeah, I just want to kind of comment on that. The 2 cards that are both high-end that are in the same grade, you have to a lot of times think about which one you'd rather have in which deck. Alright, that's it for today. Hopefully I can get my microphone fixed up because I've had to pause and restart quite a few times in this. So I'll work on getting that, and then I'm also going to move on to reviewing Black later on today, such that I can get 2 videos out each day for this week. So thank you everybody for tuning in. I will see you in the next review. Bye-bye.